Joining us now, we're going to talk music and cover songs, and a great new book out telling the stories behind the greatest cover songs of all time called Cover Me. We're joined today by Ray Padgett on the telephone. I believe he's up in New York City today. Ray, good to talk with you. How are you?
I'm great. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, as a guy who's been working the radio stations a long time, when we had a chance to have you on, I wanted to have an opportunity to read the book, which I did, and it's really kind of been fascinating to me. I did a little bit of top 40, and my DJ on the radio has been more jazz-oriented, big bands, but I've always been fascinated by cover songs, and it's a great topic. I guess it probably was difficult to kind of whittle it down to the ones you chose, right?
Yeah, it was. Pretty early on, I made a list of all the ones I could write about, famous, iconic cover songs, and there were, 200. It was a really long list, but I decided that I didn't want to write, like an encyclopedia. I wanted something you could really sit down with and read and enjoy. So I needed to tell, stories. So I whittled it down to 20 based on A, that they were great songs, obviously. B, that they had really interesting and unusual stories that I could go into in some depth. And finally, that, through these 20 songs, it sort of traces the history of the cover song.
Yeah, I grew up in New York, just outside on Long Island, and caught kind of the tail end of top 40 radio as a kid growing up. I don't know if you want to tell your age either, if you remember that as well, but that really was kind of the heyday of top 40 radio, where you heard all these songs.
Yeah, no, top 40 radio made a huge impact. I mean, so I was growing up in the 90s, and Whitney Houston doing "I Will Always Love You." That's one of the songs I write about in the book, and that was just constantly on radio. That was, that made The Bodyguard one of the best-selling albums ever, one of the 4 or 5 best-selling albums ever at this point. And it's a cover. I didn't know that. I don't think a lot of people knew that who weren't country music fans, but it was a Dolly Parton song.
Yeah, you have an interesting story about her. She, of course, was known as pretty much a country singer. Then she kind of expanded, with the 9 to 5, and like you said, this song, which she wrote, I believe, in the early 70s. Didn't she write it when she was on the Porter Wagoner Show, which was a country music-based show?
Yeah, and in fact, she wrote it about the Porter Wagoner Show. It's thought of as a beautiful, love song, but in fact, it was about the end of a business partnership. She was leaving the Porter Wagoner Show to go solo, and so she wrote the song not about a romantic relationship, but about a professional one, saying to Porter Wagoner, thanks for all the help you've done with my career, but it's time for me to go off on my own. And that's what the song was inspired by.
And another great story you have in the book, Elvis Presley actually wanted to record this song, but he had a manager, I think Colonel Tom Parker, who was pretty tough and was demanding, half the songwriting credit, even though Elvis had nothing to do with writing it. And she turned him down.
Exactly right. So Dolly would love to have him record the song, but she said, no, you didn't write it. I'm not giving away half my publishing. And then she had a funny quote later on when Whitney Houston covered it. She said, I was crushed when Elvis didn't cover my song, but then later when Whitney Houston did, I made enough money to buy Graceland.
Right. Do you have any idea in your research? I don't, but what a songwriter can get? Is it based on sales of the records, or how do they get paid?
It's a percentage, and it varies a little bit. It's called a mechanical license. And the interesting thing about that is as a result of that system, a lot of people think you need someone's permission to cover a song, and the fact is you don't. You can cover any song you want as long as you don't change the lyrics, as long as you pay this set fee, and so they'll get a fee from every download or every CD sold or every royalty from the radio, etc.
Yeah, I was wondering how that worked. I guess originally on albums, if an artist covered songs, you pay originally, I guess, to use the song on an album, right? To do it.
Yeah, and if it was a single, it'd be, but essentially a percentage of any money you're getting from the song in whatever context, album, radio, single, download, etc., is going to go to the original songwriter, and that hasn't changed.
I guess there was kind of a stigma too. You mentioned a little bit in the book. A lot of artists don't want to do covers; they want to do their own music. But some, like Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin, the older singers, they didn't write their own music. They had to do covers of the great songwriters of the past. So that stigma is that still there, or is that gone?
It's going. It's sort of come and gone, because you're absolutely right. Back before the dawn of rock and roll, everything was a cover. Frank Sinatra, as you say, wasn't writing his own songs, so there was no stigma. Then once the Beatles and Bob Dylan, make it cool to write your own songs, all of a sudden there's a bit of a stigma if you're doing a cover. People will say, about a pop singer, say, I heard she doesn't even write her own songs, as if that's, the worst thing in the world. And so that's partly why I wrote the book, is to say, it's every bit as much of an art form covering a song that someone else has written and recorded and making it your own, that's really hard and that's really impressive. And I think the stigma is going away a little bit in the internet era. Every band you can think of is covering songs now, even if they're not on albums. They're doing it live and they're doing it on YouTube and on Spotify. So I definitely think the stigma is going away.
Hey, you look at a guy like musical genius and Ray Charles. He took a lot of great classic songs, America the Beautiful, some from Broadway, other songs, and really, in Georgia, I mean, he didn't write that, but people think he did because he made it his own. I mean, you can make your own style to it. So I guess doing a cover is really, you have a lot of input in how you want it to be presented.
Absolutely. Another one kind of in that genre is Killing Me Softly by Roberta Flack, which is one I write about in the book.
Right.
And, no one knew that song before she did it. It was an obscure song by a songwriter named Lori Lieberman that had been written and released and had done exactly nothing. But when Roberta Flack took it over, she totally made it her own.
Yeah, I always thought she wrote that. I mean, or because she had the original hit, the biggest hit on it. You kind of think that person also wrote the song, even if you didn't look at the album or the record, which gives you the songwriters. But you almost assume they wrote it if they had the big hit on it. Yeah,
which is one of the things I'm writing about in this book, is to try to point out some of those instances where you think, or Aretha Franklin, Respect, that's another one of the classic examples where a lot of people think that's an Aretha Franklin song, but in fact she was covering an Otis Redding song.
Yeah, I didn't know that either. I assumed she wrote that because it was so much associated with her. And you have a lot of stories like that.
That's the thing. You don't need to write it, but you can still own it, which she certainly does.
Yeah, you own the song. And, of course, another one, Gladys Knight and the Pips with Midnight Train to Georgia. I mean, I had assumed they wrote that as well, but you got a great story in the book about that.
Yeah, the funny thing about that song is that it was not originally titled Midnight Train to Georgia.
Right.
It was originally titled Midnight Plane to Houston. And the way that came about was the songwriter Jim Weatherly called, of all people, Farrah Fawcett, just happened to be a friend of his. They were, chatting. She was saying, I'm packing my bags. I got a flight tonight. I'm leaving on a midnight plane to Houston. He says, that's a good song title. He writes the song. But then by the time it gets to Gladys Knight, she's saying, well, this is a great song, but, my people don't really go to, they don't take planes, they take trains, and they're not going to Houston, we're from Georgia, so can I change the title? And she does, and it becomes a massive hit as Midnight Train to Georgia.
I'm assuming Farrah didn't get a cut of that.
I don't think so, but I think she was okay.
Yeah, I think she did okay after that. And the book is filled with great stories like that. How did you kind of do the research on this? I mean, where do you go to find these stories?
Well, in a lot of cases, I tried to talk to the people who were involved. In some cases, the famous people like David Byrne of the Talking Heads or Roger Daltrey of the Who, to talk about their recordings, but also, the people sort of further behind the scenes, the lesser-known people. Like, for instance, with Whitney Houston, I Will Always Love You. Whitney's not around to talk anymore, so I found various engineers and producers, and I even dug up the guy who ran the mobile recording van that was parked outside the Miami hotel where they were recording that scene in The Bodyguard. And, he was telling me stories about being trapped in the van with Kevin Costner as she was recording it. So I tried to interview as many people as I could.
I should have mentioned also, you kind of started this with a blog, right, about 10 years ago, that called Cover Me.
Yeah.
So that has a lot of readers.
Yep, it's covermesongs.com.
Yeah, so that's...
Yeah, the book came out of the blog. It's been quite a journey.
Well, the name of the book is Cover Me, the stories behind the greatest cover songs of all time, and features really great behind-the-scenes stories of 20 of the famous cover songs. We've only touched on a couple, but we want the readers to get out there and check out the book. And give out your website, if you would. People get more information about it.
Yeah, it's at covermesongs.com, and there's more info on the book, but also just 10 years of content about great cover songs.
Great. As I said, as a radio guy, I've always been fascinated by the stories behind the music, and you really kind of touched on it here. I'm sure you can do 10 volumes of this. You probably got another one in the works, I would imagine, right?
I certainly could. I tried to pick the songs that would tell the sort of definitive story the first time around, but I might do one that's like in a specific genre. We'll see. Yeah.
Well, Ray Padgett, thanks for being with us. Hopefully we can talk again, and we'll look forward to doing it hopefully sometime next year.
All right. I appreciate that. Thanks so much.
I'm Stan Brock. 30 years ago, I formed Remote Area Medical to help people overseas. But then we found generations of families in America isolated by poverty from the health care they need. Together, we can take dental, vision, and medical help to 1 million adults and their kids, right here at home in the United States of America.
If you'd like to order the book we're talking about, please go to DougMilesMedia.com and enter the author's name in the Amazon search box. Thank you for listening. Please come back soon for more conversations here at DougMilesMedia.com. This has been a presentation of Doug Miles Media, all rights reserved. You can listen to or download previous programs at iTunes, Stitcher.com, or DougMilesMedia.com.